In your wanderings, you stumble upon a ruined temple buried deep within the heart of the forest. Wary, you continue on through thick overgrowth until you see a clearing that was once an ancient cathedral built by people, now rebuilt by nature itself. In the center is a preserved altar, stacked with various dice of all shapes and colors. As you contemplate what this means, a cloaked figure approaches from the shadows.
Welcome, brave adventurer. Have you come to roll the dice? Explore strange new worlds with new strange rules? If you seek adventure worthy of being shared with good friends, you have come to the right place. Just roll for initiative.
Welcome to the Nat One Nerds podcast.
Welcome to the podcast, everyone.
Hey guys, this is Nat One Nerds, and we're here for another episode.
Yes, but first I think we need to do a round of introductions.
Yeah, we have someone else special here, so pretty sure you know Parker and I. This is Brandon.
Yes, I am Parker. I am with Nat One Nerds podcast, and my favorite TTRPG is Fate Accelerated.
I'm Brandon, also with Nat One Nerds, and I'm a little split. I'm honestly kind of leaning into Pathfinder right now.
Yeah, I'm Willow, and I actually run a podcast called the RPG Goblin, and my favorite TTRPG is Monster of the Week, which is really good.
I was kind of suspicious you were going to say that one after the last, I've listened to a couple of your recent episodes. It's like, I feel like she's going to say Monster of the Week. So, because it does sound really fun.
Yeah. It's currently my favorite. It's also one of the 3 TTRPGs I've actually been able to play so far. But it's definitely my favorite, and it's actually really the first TTRPG I actually did get into. Funny enough, other than D&D.
Yeah, I feel like the cliche answer when people say their first TTRPG is usually Dungeons and Dragons, and I feel like Pathfinder is probably a close second.
It's pretty far up there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say Call of Cthulhu, maybe.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your podcast? What's it about?
Yeah, absolutely. So the RPG Goblin is my podcast, like I said. So I actually came up with the idea of doing it when I was driving home from Ohio. We go up to Ohio sometimes to visit, and when we were coming back, I was talking my mom's ear off about TTRPGs. Like, oh, here's all kinds of different things I'm learning, all kinds of ideas. And she's like, you just need to start a podcast. And so since then, I've had that idea in the back of my mind, and I've slowly been working up to making it. And it's finally here, the RPG Goblin, where I basically, every episode we talk about a new and different RPG. And talking with a guest, we introduce and try to teach people about what these RPGs are in a more accessible audio medium versus having to actively find them yourselves online or having to read the books to fully understand the idea of the game.
So essentially this is now the perfect collaboration episode then between our two podcasts.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I've listened to a few of Willow's episodes on the TTRPG Goblin. Or the RPG Goblin, sorry. I'm so used to saying TTRPG. On the RPG Goblin, because I actually was a follower of your dice page.
Mm-hmm.
That's when I learned, because you posted on that page that you're starting a podcast. So I was like, oh, well, I got to follow. And so once I follow, I was like, okay, our podcast needs to follow. And so then I was like, oh, we should do a collaboration. And then it just went from there. So definitely very
and here we are.
Yeah, exactly. So we're very excited to have you on to obviously talk TTRPGs, because that's the best subject ever.
I mean, you're not wrong.
Always the current obsession.
Yeah.
I mean, ironically, I've been trying to get into dice making for a while. I've been waiting for about 3 months now for Parker to print me out a set of master dice so I can make them old. But it happens.
Between work, school,
life is busy.
Absolutely.
So kind of like with podcasting, I still kind of consider myself more toward the amateurish side of 3D printing. I'm very proficient in buying the file off of Hero Forge, downloading it, splicing it, printing it, the end. I've done that so far, so I got to start branching out, but I'll get there. I promise you will get your dice, man.
You're good. As long as it
feel the
happens at
struggle.
some point.
So, just as a quick side note, Willow's dice page is Druidic Dice, and I know you're on Instagram, or is that page on Facebook too?
Only on Instagram.
Only on Instagram. Okay, so if you use Instagram and you want to follow some amazing dice, go follow her page. So,
Oh yeah,
Aw,
they're
cute.
really pretty.
just as a side note, because they really are. I'm really tempted to buy some dice off of Willow because they're really cool. And my wife keeps saying, "You just bought dice. You already have 15
That's the
sets."
whole argument.
Yeah, and?
There's never enough dice.
Yeah, and
I want more. I want red ones now that have swirls in them and cellophane and sparkles and are pretty. So I don't see your point.
But they don't. I need dice that matches my character's personality.
Mhm.
Because I've actually kind of latched onto that argument a little bit.
Dude, that's what I do. If there's ever a character that I get attached to, I will go and do in-depth research to try to find the perfect set of dice for my character. Like right
Really
now,
natural.
the character I'm playing in Parker's campaign is a gold dragonborn paladin. So naturally, I spent like a week researching to find a set of really cool metal gold dice that fit him just perfectly. But it was like, I have such attachment to these dice now.
They are now my
Yeah.
babies.
Yep, basically.
Now I'm thinking that we need to have Willow back on just to talk dice. 'Cause,
Oh my god. All day.
Same.
You know, we can pull out the psychological reasonings for the need for more dice, like just to help people. Like, if you need justification for your significant other to help get more dice, this is the episode for you.
Yeah, just send them this episode. We'll do
So-
the explaining for you.
Yeah, I'm definitely putting a pin in that idea. Come back to that. But as we said, we're going to talk specifically about TTRPGs. And we definitely want to, because both our podcasts talk about TTRPGs, you know, exploring those TTRPGs with our listeners to help them understand kind of what the system's about a little bit, maybe some helpful hints and insights into the system and whatnot. But we kind of wanted to go back to the roots and help people understand why both me and Brandon and also Willow do podcasts about TTRPGs and what got us into them and why we're encouraging other people to go into them, because they really should.
Yes, they should. Absolutely.
Number one, because we want an audience for our podcast. And number two, I know for me personally, and I've kind of mentioned this actually on previous episodes, but just to reiterate this, I know I personally started exploring different TTRPGs because I was listening to an actual D&D play podcast, because D&D was I guess still by default is my bread and butter, because it's the one I'm most familiar with and in the one that's most popular, nostalgic for reasons. In listening to this D&D actual play, they kept mentioning that they had a sister podcast, and I was like, well, I like their one player that runs that podcast. I started listening to them, and they were a Fate at the time, they were pretty much just Fate Accelerated, and they went on these little adventures, and it was just amazing the fact that they could do these settings so easily. Like, there was a little arc where they played rejected Transformer characters. So one guy could turn into a ceiling fan. One guy at first turned into a glass instrument. So encounters. Now, Fate Accelerated isn't necessarily super known for its combat, but the fact still is that he played a character that's what he transforms into, is a glass instrument. It made for a very interesting encounter, and of course one of them wants to be Optimus Prime, but obviously is not Optimus Prime, but he still talks like him, and it was just this whole spiel. It was absolutely hilarious. They've done other ones too. Our listeners actually know these guys. It's actually the podcast
Improv Tabletop.
Yeah, Improv Tabletop, and Ned and Christian from that podcast actually came on to help us explore the Fate Accelerated system. So they essentially helped me get into like, oh, this is such a cool system. But then obviously the question became, what other systems are out there? Because I never took them very seriously. I was like, oh, just some knockoffs or whatever.
Your eyes were opened.
I know, my eyes were opened. Yes.
So many opportunities.
I know, and now that the more we explore, and as me and Brandon talk about, like, what should we explore next, it's like there's such a long list of stuff. So now I try to help convince my wife that I need this TTRPG because I need it for the podcast. And she's like, "Do you really need it for the podcast, or do you just want it?" I'm like, the most appropriate answer is both.
Yeah. I mean, see, you can just send this video and like, this is the proof of why I need it. Like, just this here.
Yeah, I initially started exploring different systems when I started a campaign at home with just my family with Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. And my cousin who's playing with us, he plays primarily in Pathfinder. So that got me wondering, like, what are the differences? Like, why are there different systems for this? What's, like, going on here? So I started looking into it, and I was like, oh, hey, there's actually some really cool things here that it does better than D&D and other things that D&D does. And then Parker brought the idea of exploring podcasts to me, and I was like, hey, that could be kind of cool to see what everything is, because every system has their own strengths and weaknesses, and all of them accomplish different things. So it'd be really cool to have this repertoire of knowledge of all these different systems, so that way, if I want to play a specific way, I can start a campaign in the right system instead of just trying to shove D&D into whatever box I want to play in, because it's relatively versatile, but it can't do everything.
Yeah, it's like trying to shove a square into a round hole, you know? Like, it just doesn't quite fit, and it's more trouble than it's worth.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I'm actually kind of I'm similar in the path of learning it through about learning about other systems through an actual play as well. The reason that I even got into D&D was through the Adventure Zone. And from there, when they started their second campaign, Amnesty, with Monster of the Week, I thought it was such a cool game. And I thought it was a cool game for a really long time. And it wasn't until like later last year that I was finally like, okay, what is that? How do I actually play this game? You know, how do I actually do it? Because I started to pick up playing D&D again, and I wanted to start to explore what other options there were out there. I was having fun with D&D, but it wasn't fulfilling like every desire that I had within a game. So I finally looked into Monster of the Week and got the book, and I read it and have pretty much become obsessed since with RPG books. And my huge shelf full of books can attest to that as well. It also is why Monster of the Week is the first non D&D game that I've played, and also my favorite. It's just kind of what got me started into the world of all these other possibilities that I just really appreciate.
You know, kind of like as you're saying, it introduced you to so many different worlds. Because I know with Dungeons and Dragons or D&D, you have these settings, and they're so fun to explore, and they're big sandboxes. But then you get into the other systems where you would never have even thought of those things if you only ever stayed within Dungeons and Dragons, or just stayed within one system.
Absolutely. One of my like favorite examples of like just systems that are kind of out of the box with just their like primary idea. It like Monster of the Week is one that I really like, but Electric Bastion Land is another system that it's Electric Bastion Land and Into the Odd. They're the same like system, but Electric Bastion Land is like a supplement for Into the Odd. And that is one of my, I think, favorite TTRPGs that I haven't yet gotten to play, but I desire it so bad. Because its intended audience and the like intended setting and what kind of games that you should play in this game is games that are kind of hosted within this apocalyptic sort of world where you are in this bustling and chaotic and large city called the Bastion, and you are playing treasure hunters who are in debt, and you have to go out and find treasure to bring it back and pay off your debt. And through that, you form like allies and nemesis and all kinds of different things. But the whole idea is just treasure hunting in this really strange and odd world. And you could do something like that in D&D, sure. However, there is more of a magic around a system that is specifically built for such a specific idea that works so well that I can't even describe.
Oh, I'm sure.
I mean, that's how honestly Fate Accelerated is we've noticed that while D&D is very much built around combat, Fate Accelerated is not, but what it is built around is roleplay. So if role-playing is an aspect of tabletop role-playing games that you're
Imagine.
I know. I feel like everybody's interested to at least some degree if they're playing a tabletop role-playing game. But if that is the part that really makes you happy, then Fate Accelerated is a great system to do that with because it encourages the roleplay. Even the mechanics themselves are built around the idea of like these mechanics actually help you roleplay. Unlike with D&D, where the mechanics are all based around combat essentially, and then there's like these like there's some flavor spells or there's some suggestions, but the mechanics themselves don't really do a whole lot for the roleplay. It's kind of it's solely up to the DM and the players around the table to create that. While with Fate Accelerated and other systems, that comes across so much easier. So if hunting for treasure is an aspect or a story that you really like, obviously the system you suggested is amazing for that.
Yes. Electric Faction Lantern into the odd. 10 out of 10 would recommend. But no, I agree with that. That is one thing that, at least when I started to get into D&D, that's what never clicked was roleplay. Because when I was getting introduced, it was after I knew about a podcast, and then I got into a game, and it was a public game. And even though I do have like good memories and good experiences through those games, a public game isn't the best setting to actually kind of introduce new players into a game and make it easy for them to roleplay. It was never explained to me. I didn't really know too much about games at that point, and so when people would start to roleplay at the table, I would feel completely lost because I didn't really know how to engage with that because it was D&D and it's based more in, like you said, combat. Pretty much every spell and ability is more so based in combat and just matters of how much damage you can do versus how can I make these social interactions easier or even abilities around social interactions in general. And that is something I've really, really appreciated with reading these TTRPG books, of actually talking about the roleplay aspects of the game and having mechanics in the game that is completely roleplay and narrative focused, to where that is the first and foremost part of the game. Narrative and roleplay and what your character is going to do and say versus the nitty-gritty of the mechanics. If that makes any sense.
Oh, that makes total sense. I've actually found myself cheating a little bit, and I homebrew a lot in my games, to the point where sometimes I'll actually homebrew the system a smidge to make it fit better, to the point where I'll play 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons as like the main game, but I'll throw in the aspects loosely tied to the characters from Fate for social encounters so they can actually have something to do there. And I'll also throw in like some mechanics from Pathfinder that I find works really well in stuff that D&D is missing. Like one of my favorite ones is Dungeons & Dragons has no rules at all for like assassinating characters, and one of my players is a rogue, and he was a little frustrated with that. So I used Pathfinder's coup de grace rules, which allows you to have a literal mechanic for taking out an incapacitated opponent. And it works so well, and it all fits together. So it's really nice to be able to kind of pull around what you want and kind of mold the game to make it better. And you wouldn't be able to do that without knowledge of different systems.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can change your games massively if you start to learn systems. Even if you are comfortable and just want to play D&D. Let's say D&D is your base system, you just want to play that. I'd say it's still like he said, still insanely useful to read other systems and learn about them just for the fact that you can pull that knowledge into your own games. You can there's I can't remember what kind of game I was thinking of running, but I'm like, man, it would be really cool if there was a sort of fort or like home base for the characters. And throughout the game, you can upgrade it and get more things for it, all of that. And there's literally literally an entire mechanic around that in the TTRPG Vaesen, which is a like Nordic horror monster hunting game. But there's a whole mechanic about like essentially building up a home base and upgrading it and making it so that it improves your lives for future missions and stuff. You could just entirely take that idea and that sort of mechanic and implement it in whatever game you want, with just needing to adjust some things possibly, but you can just do that. You are fully allowed to do that, and it's absolutely amazing.
I might actually have to check that out.
I was about to say,
It's a really cool game.
I feel like most D&D parties, when they collect so much loot, they just have to eventually find a bag of holding.
Yeah,
throw all the loot in
it's
there.
all about exploring and adventuring. You never really have a home base in a lot of campaigns.
But I know some players would like to have something like that.
Mhm.
So
Absolutely.
I think the other thing too is to think, because some people, they're gonna fall in love with a system and they may try a couple other and they may just revert back to that initial system and that's what they stick with, and that's totally fine. But I think it's still important to try out, 1, 2, maybe even 3 other systems. Just as you guys were saying, you can incorporate those elements into it, or at the very least, you're suddenly mindful of, hey, there are other things outside of the player's handbook and the dungeon master's guide on how to run a D&D game that I can go outside that box.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that alone, suddenly that dungeon master suddenly is becoming a better dungeon master, just simply being aware and understanding that there is more outside of D&D than there is in D&D.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think one thing I've noticed is with the not to bring up necessarily controversy per se, but with the recent Dungeons and Dragons license fiasco, I think I've noticed that I think a lot of people in the D&D community started to realize that they were a part of a much bigger community, and I would say even go to the point of like they were part of an extended family.
exactly.
Absolutely.
Because people were reaching, other publishing companies were like, they made it clear that they felt for D&D players, people that weren't playing their systems.
Mm-hmm.
But they're like, hey, we feel for you, this isn't right, yada yada yada. And they just gently invited people to try out their systems because they're like, we don't want to do that to you. And they've even made it clear, even when some companies have gotten together to create their own open gaming license version, they still made it clear that like, we hope Wizards backtracks from this. We want them to be better.
Yeah, because no one wants the worst thing for everyone. No one wants it to be bad.
Yeah, and I think that sense of family and community kind of really extends from the base of every tabletop role-playing game, and that is to get together with a group of friends and together create a collaborative story so that you can have fun.
I mean, that's in
Exactly.
the end all that really matters. Is you're just there to goof off with a bunch of friends and have a good time.
Yep. Absolutely.
That is seriously the most important thing, and who cares if it's D&D that's your preferred system, or Fate Accelerated, or Monster of the Week, or any other game in the universe. As long as you guys are having fun, and honestly, that's really it. As long as you're having fun, you're doing great. You don't have to worry about anything. And a lot of people I know don't want to support Wizards of the Coast and such after what happened, but everyone who already has like D&D material and everything, you are still more than welcome to enjoy those games. You don't have to stop playing D&D just because of a debacle. You don't have to stop playing D&D because of what happened. You can still enjoy the game if is what brings you happiness and you enjoy it and have fun with your friends, you can continue to play it. Have fun.
Yeah, because I feel like the table is definitely, especially when you find that good group of friends, and not that scheduling conflicts still don't arise in any tabletop role-playing game table, but
Unheard of.
I know. What? You have a schedule conflict? How dare you? No. It happens. But when you do find that group of friends where the effort's put in, you get together often enough, it becomes a special group of friends. Honestly,
Oh, yeah.
it's
It really
unique
does.
from every other friend you have. Like, oh, it's almost like that's my D&D friend, and I'm just like, oh man, like I just feel special because because we not only do we bond, but we bond through the characters, and we just
Mhm.
learn so much about other players, the dungeon master, game master, and just other aspects. Like scenarios will get brought up, and suddenly we're like, oh, we've never thought of that before. Because things you learn at the table with your group of friends, especially if it's a good group and you're running a good campaign with whatever system you're running, those things can over time be brought out of the table into your everyday life for the betterment as well, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
I mean, like how we started playing together and our wives became best friends out of it.
Yep.
Exactly. It's all about, I mean, even that there, though, is community building. Like, you are building your own little community with your group of friends. Like, you guys
Exactly.
have jokes and references to these grand adventures you went on, and as well as, like, while you're playing through campaigns, you are usually going through some pretty intense stuff. I mean, whether it be fighting against like big bad evil things, the world destroying apocalypses, stuff like that, you're all in it together. This is a shared experience where you all are just getting really deep into this game, and like you said, it's just such a special relationship there that you end up forming with your group of friends and people. It's
Yeah.
very special.
Do you guys actually mind if I share some wisdom from Uncle Iroh?
Sure,
Sure.
absolutely.
Okay, I was hopefully you guys were okay with it because Uncle Iroh's the best. But there, for people that are familiar with Avatar: The Last Airbender, because this is where this comes from, there's a scene where Uncle Iroh's trying to teach his nephew Zuko why, as firebenders, they focus on fire and they're learning. As Uncle Iroh's trying to train him to be a better firebender, he starts to teach him things from the other nations and from other benders, from water benders, from
Mhm.
airbenders, from all these different things. And Zuko's so confused, like, why do I need to know that stuff? I can't bend air. Even if I wanted to try to learn how to bend air, I could never do it. It's an innate ability. You can only just develop it if you have it, and if you don't, you don't. But this is what Uncle Iroh says, and I feel like it just applies so well to obviously life in general, but also to tabletop role playing games. Essentially, what he says is, it is important to draw wisdom from many different places. If you take it from only one place, it becomes rigid and stale, or you become rigid and stale.
Yes. Absolutely.
Absolutely agreed. I think that drawing inspiration from different areas is honestly a good life skill to have in general because we're here in the world to learn and become better people and just learn how to do stuff. And by getting wisdom in different areas, you're able to become more well-rounded, you get more open to new ideas, and you get to get so many different perspectives that help you to build bigger pictures, and you can make so much more out of it.
Mhm.
Absolutely. This actually reminds me a lot about I started to DM my first ever D&D game last year. And we've just come about a year of it like running like a few weeks ago, which is super exciting. And when I started to DM for the first time, I kind of just went off a lot. I went off of a lot of things that I just experienced through actual play podcasts and stuff like that. I didn't really read through the DMG or anything, and I kind of made my sort of. I made a style of DMing that I do, and after that, I read the Monster of the Week core rulebook, which is, if you guys don't know, is a Powered by the Apocalypse game, which is a very interesting system that puts narrative first and above everything else. Everything that you do in the game, you say what you're going to do before, like, you don't even think about dice rolls. You say what you're going to do, and if a dice roll happens, that's up to the keeper, who is the person running the game, to decide and such. And I was reading through the Monster of the Week core rulebook, and I got to the part about being a keeper and running the games. And I read through that entire part, and it changed the entire perspective I had on running a game. With just the information that it laid out, I might grab it in a second here to read off some, like, to directly mention some of my favorite parts. But talking about, like, don't ever, when there's a lull in the game, have something happen. Another one that I love is failure doesn't mean nothing happens. Make something happen from failure. Keep it interesting. Keep things flowing. Just the advice that I got from Monster of the Week insanely improved my GMing skills within Dungeons and Dragons alone. And that's just from reading one book and just looking through some of the advice. So pull wisdom and pull information from as many places as you want and that you can, because you are going to learn so freaking much. And I'm going to grab my book very quick. Hold on.
You're good. Yeah, I think that it definitely does help with your skills to become better when you adopt new systems. Like I was saying, kind of hybridizing systems helps my game to feel a lot more fluid. And as a player, I'm sure it helps a ton too, because you're able to have a lot more experience in how the role-playing games work. You can get a little more into your character, and it just makes it a lot more fun.
Mhm.
Yeah, and you don't get, like, stuck in the, because if you make just D&D characters, sure, there's a lot of possibilities that you can do, but if you try and make a character in a different rule set and with different options, it makes you think outside of your normal box a little bit. Like, okay, these are different options. What can I do here that would still be interesting and that I would like to play? And it lets both the GMs and the players get challenged in their own ways.
I was about to say, with Dungeons and Dragons, when you make a character there, it's very hard to break the medieval fantasy trope. You know,
I agree,
the
yes.
classes are clerics and paladins and armor, bards. Like, nobody's referred to as a bard in the modern world, but that's a very medieval thing. And those it's very hard to break those molds, and it's even harder to break some of the stereotypes involving some of those classes when building a D&D character. But one thing that we had such a fun time with Fate Accelerated was not only I personally had learned that you can make a transformer that wants to turn into a ceiling fan and still think he could be Optimus Prime at some point in his life, but I never would have thought to have played a psychic detective at the table.
Mhm.
Ned played a mailman. It was just a mailman. Like, it wasn't anything special, just a mailman in, like, the early 1900s or something like that. Like, real early, like, kind of the turn of the century point. And that just wanted to deliver mail to little Jenny down the street so that she can have her wooden rocking horse for Christmas.
Yeah, my character was just an accountant from the 90s. Never thought that would be fun to play.
And we ended up fighting the ghost of, well, I won't spoil too much in case Willow wants to listen to that episode. I don't know if she has or not, but
I have not yet, but this is making me very curious.
it's our from our Christmas episode with Fate Accelerated, because we came out with the one shot kind of around Christmas time, so we did a Christmas thing. So I'll refrain from spoiling anything for you in case you want to listen or your listeners want to listen to that. But it was so fun, and we did things that we never thought. Like, those three beings, like, were brought together by the circumstance and just the wacky stuff that we did and the things that we could do. It's like, wow, you really, just solely by playing one other system outside of Dungeons and Dragons, you immediately learn, I can literally, in tabletop role playing and TTRPGs, I can literally be whatever I want to be. And that's an empowering thing, honestly.
It really is.
Yeah, the The only caveat I have with that is it was really intimidating building a character in a completely new system with Fate. Like, it honestly, if we hadn't had Christian and Ned there to guide us through, I'd have had no idea what I was doing.
That's fair.
So, what advice do you guys have for someone who wants to learn a new system but is intimidated by all the changes and figuring out if they're going to do it right or not?
So how I've actually approached it, as I've recently started my Monster of the Week game, none of my players ended up reading the book at all. We love when that happens, but
That never happened.
I know, right? I ended up reading the entire thing, and how I ended up forming it, because I had 2 players that were super excited and one that was really, really nervous because he's only played D&D. This was something completely out of his realm, super nervous. And what I ended up doing is basically we had a session 0 where we laid out ground rules, covering everything, safety tools, all of that. And near the end of it, I did a whole part where I talked about each of the basic important rules. Every rule that is just the most basic and what we will be at least doing within the first arc. This is what we're going to cover. Just so that they know it. So when we start, they have a basic idea and aren't just like freaking out. Along with that, Monster of the Week also has some really amazing reference tools, both for the players and for the keeper, where it lays out all the rules for you on 2 pieces of paper. And you don't have to actually have the book to be able to play the game. It's honestly fantastic. But I did it that way of essentially approaching it through a call and just explaining the rules in a basic and simple way so that it wouldn't feel overwhelming. They would have a good idea. And then as we're playing now, I tell all of my players, we are within the first arc of the game. It's okay if you mess up. Because guess what? Everyone's gonna mess up. I was messing up even starting the game. I read the whole book. I've listened to an actual play of this game, but I messed up as well. I was getting used to the system, so you can mess up, and that's okay. We're all learning together. We're all gonna figure it out together. If you have questions about the rules, ask, and we can figure it out. And especially with making characters, I told them within the first arc, if you guys have any aspect of your character you want to change, whether it be the playbook, which is basically like a class, whether it be abilities that you have, anything like that, you are allowed to change it within the first arc at any point. Because you are learning a new system. You don't know what's good yet until you actually play and get comfortable. So I'm giving it like the first arc, which is about 5 sessions to get comfortable and then see where we're going to go from there. But it's really hard to introduce new players into games. It can be very intimidating, and I don't know if there's any advice that's necessarily the best advice or the best way to approach it, because I think it depends on your players and how they feel and what is holding them back. But I find that at least laying out everything in a simple way and playing systems that have really good reference sheets for the rules that your players can just print out really, really helps. And keeping everything open within like the first arc, that it's okay if things need to change and it's okay to make mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I love how you brought up, because I'll always emphasize this with any TTRPG system is that session 0, especially when everybody, like in your scenario where this was everybody's first time playing Monster of the Week, even for the game master, the keeper. And just this, like, hey, and laying out those things, like, hey, it's okay to make mistakes. We're gonna make mistakes, but we're gonna do this together, and we're still gonna have fun, and we're still gonna tell a really great story. And I think just building off that platform alone can really help emphasize that players can learn something new. And I think for some systems, depending, I know especially with Dungeons and Dragons and how heavy it can be. Sometimes I've always told people that the best advice I had is if you want to try Dungeons and Dragons, find the right group. But the challenge becomes when you can't find the right group, or really any group for that matter. Not everybody's comfortable playing with complete strangers, and that's totally understandable, and I definitely sympathize with that. So I think sometimes too, if you're starting from scratch and you really want to try it, just try to find at least 2-3 other people that are willing to kind of get on the horse and go sometimes. And sometimes that's what you got to do sometimes with certain systems from what
Absolutely.
I can tell.
Yeah, and I would say nothing against your players or anything, but if you're starting a new system, read the book. That helps a lot. Getting to know the mechanics in the system will make it so much more comfortable because there's nothing worse than getting thrown into a new system, having no idea how anything works, and you just go. It's so much
I
easier
agree.
if you're able to do that research beforehand. So my biggest advice would be, first off, session 0, absolutely do it. Read the book beforehand, before session 0, hopefully. And if you can, find someone who knows what they're doing in the system to help coach you. Whether that's a
Yes.
friend who knows it, whether it's a cool podcast, or even just like a YouTube video explaining a tutorial on how to play. There's resources everywhere for pretty much every TTRPG, I feel like. So if you're willing to go and use those resources, it'll help you so much with being comfortable with starting that new system.
Absolutely, I 100% agree.
And I will add on to that. Number one, I do hope, Nat One Nerds and RPG Goblin is very helpful to people as a resource. But another thing you can do too is that sometimes just listening to actual play podcasts can be a benefit. That's how I I didn't know everything about the system, but I got a decent introduction to Fate Accelerated through Improv Tabletop just by listening to them.
Yeah.
Like I understood oh, this is a thing. They use this kind of dice. Making things less foreign, even if it's just a couple things, that alone can also be a huge help. So
Huge agree. I mean, because same way for me. I got into at least Monster of the Week from a podcast. I was able to actually hear them play it out and all of that before I even tried it. And that's the main reason why it sold me on the system so much. When it came time of what game do I really want to play, it was Monster of the Week, because that was the game that I was, other than D&D, that I was actually introduced to and saw get played out. And so I'm like, oh yeah, I'm super confident with being able to run that. And then we play and we make mistakes, and that's okay. But it was the most comfortable. So always do something that is the most comfortable for you and your table. And I will expand on, yes, players should read rules and should read the books and the information. I wish that mine did. And there are times. Yeah, like I wish that mine did, but luckily there are enough games out, not games, but TTRPGs out there that offer enough simplicity that usually you can learn most of the rules through just a discussion. So I do appreciate the systems that do allow that flexibility like that, because I have players that I play with 2 of my siblings and a really close friend. And my brother, super busy adult. He didn't have time to be able to read the system. And my younger sibling is very dyslexic and has a very hard time reading books. And as soon as it has to come to reading and things like that, their confidence immediately comes down and their likelihood to do anything goes down. So I appreciated Monster of the Week being set up in the way that it is to be accessible to players that didn't have the opportunities to be able to read the books. And we had a session 0, and I could print off, and we could all print off sheets for the basic information, and they're good to go. So that is a praise that I'll give to the more simplistic systems with more quote unquote like rules light, where it's not like D&D and you have 20 million mechanics to keep track of while you're in combat. But in Monster of the Week, the only dice you roll are 2d6s. And you have a modifier from -2 to +3. And that's it. Like, that's the most mechanics that you have to worry about when it comes to at least like the basic stuff.
Sounds pretty similar to Fate with the dice rolls.
yeah, it's pretty simple. You use 4 dice. They're not typical D6s, but they're 6-sided dice, and you have
Oh yeah, the fudge dice.
the fudge dice, and you have the basic. You have kind of set modifiers, and you kind of just assign where they go. yeah, it's also a pretty simple system.
Yeah, I've heard some great things about Fate. Well, Fate and Fate Accelerated.
Yeah, because I know for me and Brandon, we'll definitely come back to the full Fate system for Fate 4. But as you kind of said, there are so many systems out there. There's a lot of simple systems, and I'm sure both Brandon and I here on That One Nerds and Willow on RPG Goblin will definitely be exploring those even further. Willow, any final thoughts on the subject before we wrap up?
Don't be afraid to try new things.
Wise
That-
advice in life.
Yeah.
But we hope this helps you guys if you're looking to try a new system, a couple of just general guidelines, and we really appreciate Willow helping us out here.
Mhm.
So glad to come on.
Yeah, just real quick, where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at the RPG Goblin, dots in between each word. And I'm also on YouTube, but I haven't really touched that too much. And my actual podcast is on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and pretty much any podcast platform that you can think of, because there's a lot of them out there.
Yeah, there is a lot, as we've kind of slowly been adding podcasts to our platforms, to our own podcasts. It's like, oh, we should probably include this one. Oh, there's another one. Oh, we should include that one. So, Willow, thanks again so much for joining us. I'm sure we'll do another collaboration here soon, either on this podcast or yours.
Absolutely.
We're already looking forward to it, honestly.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I'm so glad. I had a bunch of fun as well.
And thanks to you guys for tuning in. We always appreciate you guys stopping in to listen to us. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Nat One Nerds Podcast. And if you ever want to reach out to us, let us know what you think, any questions, ideas you have. We always love interacting with you guys. Or if you just want some fun memes, we post those every now and then too.
Yep, share the memes, guys. Memes are always acceptable. And if you prefer, you can always just send us an email at nat1nerdspodcast@gmail.com. You can also reach out to that as well.
This is Nat One Nerds Podcast and the RPG Goblin. We hope you guys have a great day and happy rolling.